Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Beit Midrash. It's been a couple weeks. It's nice to be back. It's nice to have you back. Hope everybody's had a good couple weeks off and good learning or good traveling or good whatever you were doing over the last couple weeks. But glad you're back here today. So we're switching topics. We're switching books, switching lots of things. So we're now reading "To Be a Jew Today" by Noah Feldman. For those who are watching on Zoom later, or not Zoom, on YouTube later, we're on Zoom now. Too many things. So we're going to discuss the introduction, which means we're probably not going to get super deep because he's just kind of laying out what he's going to do in the introduction, because that's what they do in the introduction. But nonetheless, I want to open it up if anybody has any opening comments, questions, thoughts from what you read from Professor Feldman to open up the book.
Well, this is Martin. I'll read something from the book that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, if you can give a page number or a section.
It's page 5, and it's in the first full paragraph on the page. And it says, from the Bible to the Talmud to the medieval rabbis and philosophers and mystics and poets to modern reformers and the Zionists to the new formation of today, there's no area of Jewish thought that has been alien to me. I love them all, and they all make me crazy. I thought that was kind of cute.
And that was a good line. Yes, I agree. Good thought, good study. And really digging into any of those can cause you to fall in love and can drive you a little bit crazy. Both, yes. Lisa, I saw your hand before, and then Karen will get you after.
Yeah, just to respond to a little bit of what I read in the introduction. I'm really glad to see that he's grappling with and struggling with some of the same questions that I do struggle with, like what do I believe about God, and I don't. One day might believe one thing, and another day I might believe another thing, and I might read what he writes and shift as I go. It's like a constantly shifting question for me, except I know there's something bigger than me. And then the other thing is struggling about Israel, because I am struggling about my relationship to Israel right now, and to the people of Israel, but also then the government is inextricably bound up with the people of Israel, and how do I deal with all that? So I'm glad to see he's it's very current, and he's struggling with these same questions.
Excellent. Karen?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, I'm so glad we're reading this book. The introduction really made me excited, and it just feels right to read it. And then with Israel too. I mean, that is a big thing. And I was reminded about our study about Israel on setting the table at Shavuot. And it was one of the breakout sessions led by Margaret Norman, and to struggle with how we all feel about Israel. So I'm really looking forward to getting informed about that as well. Mm-hmm. Excited. I think it's good timing. Excellent. Oh yeah, and one more thing. Fresh Air with Terry Gross, there's an amazing interview with Noah Feldman about this book. And I tried to find it, but I think they're running reruns. And so it had to be when the book went out. So I haven't given up my search, but when I find it, it's really worth listening to. It was really good.
Well, thank you. If you do find it, please let us know and send out the link for it so anybody who wants to can listen. Esther, I saw your hand up.
I also was very intrigued and excited about the book. And actually, the first sentence, what is the point of being a Jew, is something I often struggle with in terms of, why is it so important to me that this continuing on? That my child raise her child as a Jew. Why is this so important? The world has all kinds of different people who seem to survive. And why is this so important to me? So I kind of got excited about the possibility of seeing perspectives on that.
Any other opening thoughts or comments? Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
I also want to add, I think everybody has said something that I was thinking about saying. Really, really good, so many good things in this introduction. But additionally, I liked his persistent saying there's no such thing as a bad Jew.
Yes. I'm a big fan of that line as well. That there's a lot of ways to be Jewish as long as you're not a bad Jew. But I'm not a big fan of that phrasing of being a bad Jew either. I think that's on pages 8 or 9. Is that it's not about how many meets vote you do. It's not about what you do or what you don't do, but a Jew can do no wrong, as he says, but by wrongdoing, he does not cease to be a Jew. A Jew can do wrong, but once you're a Jew, it doesn't matter if you've done wrong, you're still a Jew. And so that's the important piece of that. And it's really generally not good practice on behalf of Jewish communities to start judging other people's Judaism on any topic but to wrestle with what does it mean to be Jewish and how do we live that out in our lives. And Karen mentioned the resetting the table discussion. That's a key part of that for those who participated either on Shavuot or in what the JCRC did. I'm trying to remember how long ago now it was, but several weeks ago. That's broad enough that it encompasses the somewhere in there. That rather when you disagree, can you ask questions and can you listen and can you come to can you dig into why the other person is coming to the conclusions they are coming to rather than just jumping on the conclusions that they are holding on to, and how do we listen to each other in that way to be able to do that? Troy, you had your hand up. I just was finishing my thoughts before I called on you.
Yeah, just along this line, when he was talking about bad Jews, he said something about Maimonides and the guy the perplexed. Was he just using that as an example, like even people found problems with what he was saying, or was there something specific that was boycotted or?
Um, yeah, he talks about it a little bit. Maimonides was a little, does come off as a little brash at times, um, and as you know, on one hand, the Guide for the Perplexed was kind of a, you know, you don't need to read the Talmud, you don't need to read the Mishnah, you don't need to read the Torah. I'll explain it all for you. The other major work that Maimonides is known for, the Mishnah Torah, um, was also not particularly well received by the establishment for the same reason, because he basically said, you don't need the Talmud anymore because I've taken all the laws and made it into a code for you, so you know what to do. And if you read this and you read the Torah, that's all you need, which is why he called it the Mishnah Torah, because it's the Torah and this is second to the Torah, and that's all that you need. And this, everybody else was kind of like, well, you know, that's not really what we do. We study Talmud, we study Midrash. There's lots of additional things that are worth studying besides just Torah and, you know, your own work. It was a little on the brash side of him, and I think the takeaway that Feldman is trying to say here is, there were people calling Maimonides a bad Jew. And if Maimonides, one of the most significant rabbis in Jewish history, if he can be labeled as a bad Jew, pretty much anybody can be labeled as a bad Jew. That doesn't mean you are. You know, so I think that's more of where he was trying to go with it. But Maimonides was a little on the brash side and the arrogant side at times. So he did rub some establishment people the wrong way, and that's, I think, where some of that animosity came from. Does that answer your question, Troy? Okay. I did appreciate that bad Jew conversation, so I'm glad you guys brought that up. I don't want to go. I don't want to go too deep into the introduction because, you know, it's an introduction, and B, I don't know if I could go too deep into an introduction because it's an introduction, and he's not actually laying anything out here other than what he's going to do in the rest of the book. So, and I haven't read the whole book yet, so, you know, I can't tell you, I can't forecast for you what he's going to say. But one thing I will say that I did appreciate jumping into it is an idea that probably you're coming off the last book of Rabbi Artsen's book, probably shouldn't be a surprise, is the interconnectedness of what we do and who we are. That I think there is I think we, as particularly 21st century American Jews, do a lot of compartmentalizing. I think we put our beliefs of God here. We put what we do ritually here, what our prayers might look like here, how we connect here, community here, Israel here. Like we kind of put boxes around, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think there is more power in how do those boxes interconnect and interact with each other. So as you evaluate your theology and your beliefs in God and in what God is and how God interacts with this world, how should that then influence your ritual observance? How should that then influence your views on Israel and your relationship with Israel? How should that interact and view with and inform your your relationship with your community. And I do think finding a way to integrate all those boxes together will help provide us with more meaningful lives, as by and large. At least that's my hypothesis, generally speaking. So, I'm interested to see how he lays that out in his book. He hasn't quite laid it out yet, other than to say that they should be informing and interacting with each other. That was at least my takeaway from it. Is we'll start with our theology, because that, particularly somebody who grew up in a modern Orthodox background, that's kind of the starting point. And then how does our theology then inform our relationship with Israel, and then with the rest of the Jewish family, so to speak? Though he does seem to have a different view of family than, and he says he has a different view of family than we might otherwise expect. But thoughts so far?
The only comment I wanted to make is I keep thinking, is he going to be able to pull this off? Like, I feel like he has promised so much. I'm excited to read it, but I'm also a little skeptical of it being as broad and overarching as he is promising.
I'll say he's a Harvard law professor, so he's got to be at least kind of smart. So I have faith in him to pull it off, but we'll see. You'll tell us in about 4 or 5 months if you think he's pulled it off or not, when we finish the book. Yes, Cindy.
So, I haven't read the book either, but I sort of think that I'm sensing that you may have intuited where he's going with this, because like in my mind, listening to what you just said, if we bring all those things together, then we view all those things through a Jewish lens, and it's for that reason that we are Jews, because of the philosophy behind what it is that we believe. I'm not sure that makes sense, but
I think it makes sense. I think the one part I maybe push a little bit on is, if you keep all your boxes compartmentalized and separated, that doesn't make you less of a Jew. But as Jews, I'll phrase it this way. What I often say to particularly to my intro to Judaism classes, but to other people as well, is, we're not known as B'nai Avraham, we're not known as B'nai Yaakov, we're not known as B'nai Yitzchak, we're known as B'nai Yisrael. We identify ourselves as those descended from the one who wrestled with God. And so part of our responsibility, part of our job, is to wrestle with the tradition and to wrestle with what that means for how we're supposed to live our lives. So I'm not disagreeing with what you said, Cindy. I'm just pushing back on, you're not less Jewish if you don't interact with that, because you're Jewish, but which is part of what he's saying too. But that I do agree with some of the idea that it's part of the wrestling with the theology and figuring out our theology, and then how does that theology then inform our behavior, our relationship with Israel, our relationship with our families, our relationship with our community. That's a very Jewish thing to do, but it's also, I think, what we're called on to do is to struggle with how do these different pieces interact with each other.
I was really, I was really intrigued when I first listened to it. And I've actually listened to the whole book on Audible probably 3 times now. So I really liked the whole thing, but I was really impressed that he set out to do, as he said, giving you a lot of different views from the sympathetic point of view. And what I'm actually really interested, and he said in the introduction that he said lots of people have come back to him with their idea of what he really is saying, and according to him anyway, they got it wrong. So he was more, at least by that light, he succeeded. And one of the things I was really interested to hear from, especially people who are reading it for the first time, is how well y'all think he did at that. Because to me, it was an amazing job, but I'm just me and I have my own criteria. So I'm really interested in how a broader community of Jews think about it.
As I said to Barbara, we'll find out in about 4 or 5 months when we finish the book.
But just to say, from like, I think he really did pull it off of exactly what he set out to do.
Yes.
It's not perfect and it's not 12,000 pages long, which it would have to be to do everything. But within what he set out to do, I think he did an amazing job. But I'm not sure everyone else is going to agree with. I'm really curious.
Um,
Well, it's interesting that you thought it was worth listening to 3 times.
and I'll say, I think he may have done something right if people are going up to him afterwards with, this is what I think you said. And he's like, nope. Or this is how I'm interpreting what you wrote. And he's like, okay, that's not really what I meant, but okay.
Well, it was even like he was saying, like, they thought they knew which side he agreed with. And he was like,
Exactly.
nope, you're not right. And so there's an
Right.
amazing medical study that I teach residents about and medical students where they had a placebo control for whether people got a real surgery or a sham surgery. And they asked the people, what did you think you got, to see if they were really biased. And what I love about that study is more than half of everybody thought they got the real procedure instead of the sham, which means the sham worked. People were randomized. It also shows you that people don't understand how randomization works if more than half of everybody thinks they got one arm. So it's kind of like this was the analog of that. He asked people what they thought he thought, and they couldn't tell, which meant he hid what he actually thought pretty well.
Yeah, I've told this story in different contexts. I don't remember if I've told it here, but a colleague of mine once shared that he gave a sermon on Shabbat morning, and after services, a congregant came up to him and said, Rabbi, I'm really, really disappointed in your sermon. That was some of the most left-leaning, liberal ideology, and I can't believe that my rabbi would be sharing that from the Bima in my congregation, and I'm just really disappointed. And another congregant was walking by as that was happening and stopped and said, what are you talking about? That was the most right-leaning, conservative sermon that I've ever heard. And actually, frankly, I'm upset because I'm upset that was told in my congregation, that my rabbi stood there and gave such a conservative-leaning sermon. And the rabbi kind of looked at both of them and said, you guys talk this out, I'm going to lunch. But, there's an interesting concept in biblical criticism and largely, I guess, in homiletics as well, between exegesis and eisegesis, to use the technical terms. Exegesis is, you're reading the text and pulling out what the text is saying and trying to figure out exactly what the text is trying to tell you and what the text of the Bible is, what's the message the author is actually trying to give. Eisegesis is you're coming in with a preconceived notion of what you wanted to say, and then you're reading the text and reading the meaning of what you want back into the text. I wonder, a little bit, as Feldman is saying, that people are coming back to him thinking they know what side he's on. How much of it they're kind of reading what they want to be reading into it, and they're kind of coming in wanting to hear him agree with them and reading it and like, yes, he agrees with me. But it doesn't really matter which side of the aisle they're coming from, as long as they're still reading it as if he agrees with them either way.
But it means he wrote it even-handedly enough that they can see it like that.
Yes, 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 Barbara.
Well, I think he explained that he wrote it sympathetically for all sides because he has believed in each of those sides at some point in his life. So he sort of rotate through those ideas. He's owned all of them. So he understands their positive use. So I don't think it's so much he's trying to hide what he thinks, is that he is positive to more than one way of looking at things.
Yes, Karen.
Yeah, I'm gonna bounce off that and say too, and maybe but say that like that's what got me like just reading something that says there's no answer. There's no right answer. I like that. That feels good to me. And that feels true. And having multiplicity, like you can believe one thing and then you can believe another, and you can be the same person and believe two polar opposite things, or feel, or not, maybe feel and believe two polar opposites. I mean, just living in this world of polarity, and there's something that feels really right about that at this time.
Nuance is okay.
Yeah, nuance. Yeah, like certainty is really scary when somebody's certain about something, for me.
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, I agree with you. I think, certainty, people who are very certain on things is a little terrifying sometimes. There are things, I hope we can be certain about. But
Yeah,
but broadly speaking,
I'm gonna agree with that too. I mean, right when I said that, but if you're, I think I heard something lately like that. The opposite of faith is being certain.
I'll have to meditate on that one.
Yeah, meditate on that. I'm still meditating on it, but
It's an interesting statement. I have to think on that one. It's an interesting idea. Yes, Lisa.
There's one line that I asked you because I wanted you to talk more about it. He says on page 11, Judaism is a well set up to allow God to be kept in the margins.
I have to find it. Give me a moment.
Okay. So the end of the third paragraph.
Oh, I'm on page 10. That's why I can't find it.
It's
I'm not the rabbi, but my take on that is that you don't have to believe in God to be Jewish.
But I don't understand why it's a well set up that way.
So here's what I think he's trying to say there is it is very easy because Judaism has all these mitzvot and has all these structured actions you are supposed to do at specific times. It's very easy to go do them and not think about how God fits into that.
So is it a commentary on orthodoxy?
No, I think it's if you compare to Christianity, for example, where you're it feels like you're required to say you believe. Judaism doesn't really ask that of us. It doesn't keep us from doing it or talking about it. It's just not central. So that's why it's well set up to allow us to just sort of ignore that for the time being. Just like we ignore heaven and hell, just like we ignore, a lot of things, because we can focus on whatever piece we want to focus on.
So yeah, I do think there's something to that. We've talked before. I know, but that Rabbi Shai Held has talked. I heard him giving a talk in which he says, a lot of what American Judaism does was done in a way because we're trying to separate ourselves from Christianity. So we stop talking about certain things because we don't want to see. We want to make ourselves distinct and different than our Christian neighbors do, which in some ways is kind of funny and ironic because that's a lot of what Christianity did, was to separate themselves from the Jews 2,000 years ago. But I wonder if this might fall into that category as well, that Christians talk so much about God and faith and whatnot and all that Jews kind of said, okay, well, we're going to not talk about that as much as a way to separate ourselves. But, I think for a lot of us, even on this Zoom call, we can say, we celebrate Passover, we celebrate Hanukkah, we come to the high holiday services, which are some of the most theologically fraught services in the entire year. We might come to Shabbat services. We might say Kaddish for a loved one who has passed away. We do all these things, but do we think about the theology while we're doing it? Do we think about how the theology impacts or causes us to do this? And he says, you can pray to a God who may or may not exist, who you think may or may not exist. You can live in a community with others without spending too much time asking whether they believe you are united as a community because of a covenant with the maybe there, maybe not God. There's a lot of things we can do in Judaism that identify us as Jewish that don't necessarily require us to give deep theological thought to. I think part of his argument is he says it has some advantages in doing it, but personally, I would argue that having an theological basis that then can help reinforce what you're doing will make those things that you're doing more meaningful and could give you more of a desire to continue doing them. But that means you then need to wrestle with the theological question, which is a difficult one, admittedly. But there's an old joke that I may have said before, that a Jew is someone who believes in no more than one God. So you can do all these things and identify yourself as Jewish without having wrestled with the theology that goes behind it. I think that's what he's trying to argue. And it's easy, and he says there's an advantage to that, is that if you do it that way, different groups of people can work together on projects that without theology getting in the way. And I once went to interfaith convention in which I asked one of the participants, like, how many denominations of Christianity are there? And a couple of them looked at each other. They're like, I don't know, like 2,000 some. And I'm like, are you 2,000? They're like, yeah, because what would happen is somebody would have a theological issue with somebody else, and they'd go start their own church that different to work on that. Like, I like this church, except I don't like this one issue. So I'll go start my own church that'll fix that one issue. And then, somebody would like, I like that church, but I'm going to go start my own one that fix this one issue. And a lot of them are theological. So, he points out that, there's a lot of division, and sometimes it can be hard even for our Christian friends between denominations to work together because they get caught in the theological views and it trips them up. He's arguing there's an advantage to Jews having this perspective in that we can work together without having to focus on the theology behind it. And he points to Zionism in particular as something that it's Zionism is not a theological basis. You can be a religious Zionist, but you don't have to be religious to be a Zionist. So he says there's an advantage to that. The downside is, as he says on top of page 12, you can lend themselves to action and practice without reflection, so that you're doing work. You're doing things, but not really sure why you're doing them or understand what's going on behind that. Yes, Margaret.
Well, it seems to me that the most useful way for me to think of being Jewish is that there is some kind of more or less framework that's maybe not as maybe built of wood or something like that. It's not something anyhow, and then there's something more fluid underneath, and the framework is some of these observances, things Shabbat and Passover and so on and so forth, and then underneath is the stuff about the theology, which is fluid, which changes, which is not, at least for me, is not really fixed, and so that's just the way.
So I mean, a little bit. I think that's what he's arguing in his. I think that's, if I'm hearing you correctly, I think that's what he argues in terms of how he's defining Judaism as a family. So if you look at particularly the bottom of page 14, going on to 15, how many of you are using ebooks, by the way? Because this will get a little more complicated, but okay. there's not a lot of sections here, but it's near the end of the chapter. So I don't know how to help you find it easily on the ebook. But he says, I will offer an extended comparison of the Jewish people to a family. Not the simplistic family structure of birth parents and biological offspring, but the real-world complex structures of attachment by adoption, accident, choice, creativity, friendship, love, hate, and above all, imagination. Family is not inevitable, nor is family always an unmitigated good in our lives. It can be self-chosen and self-created. At the same time, family necessarily exists in relation to other people whose own experiences we do not and cannot fully control. So, in some sense, that's kind of what I'm here, is that families also have their own sets of how they do things, which evolve over time, but they do things that they pass things down between the family. And so that, I think, is a little bit of how, that sounds a little bit like what you were saying about the framework, is that there's a framework of things that we do that constitute what we as a family do together and how we do it and the structures for how we do it, but it necessarily evolves over time also. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Well, I was speaking kind of more personally than as broadly as you're making it, but I think it works both ways.
Families work that way as well, right? Like, we have a nuclear family of, for many of us, us, our spouse, our children. But then, we have the family extends out. There's my side of the family. There's my wife's side of the family. There's my father's side of the family, my mother's side of the family. And, that's why we use the tree metaphor so often for families, because it branches out and goes in so many different directions. I think Judaism's the same way too. There's kind of the local and the broader family picture. Yes, Barbara Brandy.
I think as you go toward the extended family, as you called it, you get into greater differences. And I think that's one of the things he's talking about when he's talking about family and the disagreements that occur, because those of us who didn't grow up in Birmingham often have friend families that have greater differences than we have, but you're still related to them because of circumstance, situation, whatever. And there can be serious disagreements, but there can also be ways in which you find a lot of value in those people. And to me, it seems like he's suggesting that's how the different, he doesn't call them orthodox, conservative, et cetera. I forget what his actual terminology is, but that's how we can work with them, live with them, accept them, and just know where we stand is the important part. Know where you really stand yourself.
There is actually a term out there for what you were describing. It's called framily. The friends who are family, the framily. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think, even those who grew up in Birmingham also have their family also, in addition to their own family. Like they have family that they've grown up with or friends that they've grown up with. Somebody was recently talking to me about, they're in a little bit of an argument with somebody that they've been friends with since they were children because they both grew up here. And they're like, how do I navigate this discussion and this argument that we're having with somebody that I love dearly because we've been friends almost our entire lives, but, I disagree with them right now. But for them, it feels like, this person's part of their family also. Since you brought it up, what was everybody's reaction to, he, instead of going to the denominational terms of on page 10 of what he's going, his belief patterns, as he calls them, of traditional, progressive, evolutionist, and godless. Anybody have thoughts or reactions to that? It was an interesting perspective. Yes, Cindy.
Yeah, I really liked it a lot because I don't think that we really that we fit in those categories, and that those categories are far too limiting um, for the different ways of thinking. Because if you think even in terms of our own congregation, there's just not one there's not one way of thinking. I mean, we all like to pray in the same way from the same prayer book, and yet how we live our lives to get to that place it's very, very different. And yeah, I like that there is a multitude. There's a new way of looking at who I might be as a Jew.
Yes, Margaret.
I also like the fact that he points out that that mysticism can be part of any one of those categories rather than sticking it into one of the traditional categories as typically been done.
Perhaps we don't advertise that freedom as much, because I wonder why some people who jump from one group to another are actually working on them. Where do they belong, and why did they move to a different situation? And that struck a Birmingham issue for me because of people moving around. I'm not saying it happens, this week, but people in the past perhaps having changed from one group to another.
Yes, Lisa.
Well, I mean, the only problem I have with categorizing it this way is that it doesn't seem to allow for the fact that you can be like two of them together at the same time. Like I consider myself, I guess, like progressive and evolutionist at the same time. So I always feel like I can call myself conservative, but within conservative, I could be, somewhat progressive and evolutionist.
So I hear what you're saying. I think I'll just encourage you to reserve judgment at the moment, because he hasn't really defined what those are and whether or not there might be crossover between them and whether or not you could be in both. It might end up that you could feasibly be in both, and he allows for that later on in the book. But I do hear what you're saying, is that, it's interesting he uses, progressive, but I'm not quite sure, progressive comes with its own weight of what that means when we say it. Progressive seems to strike as a political liberal, but that's also what the reform movement is called outside of America, rather. It's called the Progressive Jewish Movement. So, all I'm saying is that I think it strikes some of these terms. I think might strike in a particular way, which he may or may not actually intend for it to be meant to go that way. I think godless is maybe a little bit of a harsh term, but it might include agnostic along the way. or it might include those who are, unsure along the way. So I think my personal way of reading it is like, I think I need a little more information before I go too deep into how much I agree. But I hear what you're saying, that once we'll find out somewhere in the next 4 to 5 months again. So I'm glad to hear people are excited about this book. That's a good start. So, as we go forward, I hope we're able to keep that excitement and keep learning and open-mindedly keep approaching this book together. Yes, Karen.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I found it, and I found the interview I was talking to, so I'll send it out. But I came in at the end when he was talking about the book, so that's the 20 minutes at the end of this interview. But it was really about the Harvard thing right now. So he's being interviewed about. That's why I couldn't find it, but I got it, and I'll send it to everybody. It's good.
Thank you. That'd be great. So, any other closing thoughts before we wrap up? I want to thank y'all. Good to be back together again. Good to have y'all back together again. And look forward to learning together again. We're going to take a couple weeks off, but next week we'll be back, and then we'll have class next week. We'll take 2 weeks off, and then we'll hopefully be able to press on and see how far we can get in the book until we are done, and then do something else. So thank y'all for being here. I'll look forward to learning with y'all again next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
If I don't see you before then, Shabbat Shalom. And if I don't see you until after that, Shavua Tov as well. And I'm looking forward to next week.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.